One of the issues I think that arises as you're sort of developing plug and play, plug and chug, you're getting vocabulary together, 2-5-1s together, and you're actually finding yourself actually using them. As you're learning vocabulary, there are a lot of bebop players that don't necessarily develop their solo per se.
Right.
They just get right in and they're playing language. Okay, now that's great. I love it. But yeah, I think there are things that you can do to try to develop the arc of a solo a little bit more, and to maybe obscure when you're plugging something in or not, so make it less obvious that you're doing certain things. Now, the reason why this is not a sort of first year or first lesson kind of conversation is because it takes a certain amount of musicianship to have the fluidity to be able to take whatever the ideas that you have and to modify them in some sort of way. When you're just learning vocabulary, yeah, you learn something in all keys, but there's not a whole lot of flexibility with the line that's being played. Okay, there's the 2-5-1. Okay, here I just played the 2-5-1, right? So trying to develop more flexibility with everything that you're playing, so that you don't have to play it just one way. You can play it several ways. You can play it slower. You can play it faster. You can mess with the rhythm. You can change the way that it resolves. You can repurpose it so that you can play it anywhere you want to play it. All of that kind of those kind of skills. Those are not beginner skills. That's stuff that it takes time to work into that. Now, so a few things I think that you can do that will enhance your flexibility, because that's really what we're talking about here. Is taking some lines that you ordinarily play and figuring out some different ways to repurpose them.
Okay.
How can you play it on different chord progressions? What notes do you have to change to do that? If it's a major 2-5, how can you play it in a minor context? If it's an altered 2-5, how could you play it on a major 2-5? If it's a short 2-5, how could you play it on a long 2-5?
Right. So for part of that, would doing things like a key signature matrix and just applying it over a key signature matrix be?
I'm definitely going there.
Okay.
That's definitely going to be one of the things I say. But before we get there, if you take a particular line, you take a line that you can play, and you develop 8 different ways that you can end that line. Right? That's going to be helpful, because you're in that sort of project, or in working that stuff out, and actually sitting down and maybe actually even writing some lines out that are utilizing the same, the guts of it are the same, but the way that you get out of it is different. You're actually also teaching your brain how to think. You're teaching yourself how to get out of something in a different way. Something that Parker does all the time is he'll start a line the same, and then he always finishes another way, and that is that's a very clever I mean it's a challenging thing to do. You have to have a lot of musicianship to be able to do that. But there's a way I think that you can go directly to that, and that is to sit down and say, okay, here's a line that I like, or whatever that line is, and say, okay, now what are some different things I can do with that? How can I end that differently? Do I have to do the sort of diminished thing that I'm doing at the end, or what if I tried to do that with whole tone, or what if I tried to do that with the altered scale instead of whole tone, or what if I tried to, use augmented Phrygian, fifth mode of harmonic minor, instead of this sort of diminished thing that's happening there. What if I tried to go augmented instead of doing diminished there? What if I, instead of ending on the note that I'm ending on, what if I reversed that shape? That whole thing maybe still did it diminished, but it was something that was climbing to come to a resolution note. All of those kind of things. So figure out, and actually you can even sit down with a piece of paper and manuscript paper and just write out some different ideas on how you can do that.
Right.
And and then work those things out. Sometimes I found that if I find myself repeating myself a lot, now we're going to repeat ourselves because we're humans and not robots.
Right.
And that's a good thing, because it's nice to know who you're listening to.
Right. Grab onto stuff.
Yeah, right. So, what was I saying? So sometimes what happens often is when I find myself repeating myself, the reason I'm repeating myself is because there's something unexplored about what I keep playing.
Right. Right.
So it's like, why do I keep playing that dumb thing every single time I get there? Okay, all right. Well, what is it about that it's attractive to me? Why do I like that? Okay, can I repurpose that? Can I change the rhythm? Can I come up with some kind of double time version of it or something? Can I reharmonize it? Can I create a shape-shifting exercise out of it? Can I take the intervals, all the intervals that are embedded in do an augmented version of the same thing. All the intervals are larger.
Right.
Can I do it with all the intervals are smaller? Can I totally change the rhythm and play it? By the time you work through those things, you'll either be so tired of it that it's run its course, right, that it'll have totally run its course, and or you will have discovered a bunch of other stuff,
right,
and now you're at playing in that stuff, so,
right.
So you repeating yourself, you feeling like or even the sense that you've run out of material, and then therefore you're repeating yourself, right? You gotta get more use out of the stuff that you play,
Right.
So those are some ideas of how you can do that, and that's all of that stuff that I've said so far is going to help you to develop a lot more flexibility with the stuff that you're playing. Right? Now that's prerequisite to quote unquote developing a solo, building a solo, developing the arc of the solo, sort of theme and variation kind of improvising, where you're playing an idea and then you're finding different ways to alter the idea.
Yeah, right.
And all of those kinds of devices, things like sequencing and inverting an idea, retrograding an idea, taking one theme and forcing yourself to utilize that theme throughout an entire solo. The way that Sonny Rollins starts the St. Thomas solo.
Right.
Those kinds of ideas that he's not playing a lot of material, he's just he's found
Developing.
he's
Yeah,
developing
right.
that
One
material.
thing.
You know, that could be something that you do. Study that entrance to that solo. What are the things that he's doing there, and see if you can come up with some of your own ideas, and develop them in a similar way. Yeah. So I think that's probably enough stuff to get us started.
Right.
But another consideration is the idea of intentionally playing less at the beginning of a solo to give yourself somewhere to go.
Right.
You know, so you can teach yourself how to pace. You know, say, okay, usually I jump right in and I'm playing 1,000 notes. Okay, let me come into this. Let me just state something. Let me listen to what the rhythm section's doing and see if I can borrow some ideas there that are more rhythmic ideas and not as notey maybe. And then as I'm continuing on, I start to, you know, get a little more involved, and before you know it, I'm playing stuff that maybe I usually would play. You know, some of the more notey stuff that I would play, but now it sounds like I built to that rather than giving it to you right away.
Right.
Now, are you? Some of this is like a personality thing too. Like, what is your personality tendency? Like when you're meeting new people, is your tendency to jump right in and start saying a bunch of stuff and just talk about a lot of stuff? Or is your tendency to sort of, well, let me see what happens. I'll just, I'll say a little bit now, and then, I'll see them later, and maybe I'll say a little bit more, and then, okay, and then maybe third or fourth conversation, then we actually get into something.
Right.
And it's not necessarily that you thought it through and you're making yourself do that.
It's just that's how it naturally.
It's just that's how it naturally happens. It's not like the thing where it's like a cliche where if you meet a new girl, you're supposed to, not call right away or send a text right away, or if they text you, you're supposed to wait like for a day or something before you respond, so it doesn't seem like you're too thirsty, and all this kind of stuff. Not that,
Right.
More of the what naturally tends to happen in your when you meet new people and you have your initial conversations with them. And if your tendency is to jump in with stuff, then that's because it's your personality. That's your personality is involved in that. That's my tendency. I'm not a small talker.
Right.
No, not at all. I don't like small talk. Right. So if this is going to be worth anything to me, I'm just going to start talking to you.
Right.
If you can't handle it, then you can't handle it.
Right.
But if you can handle it, cool. We can get into some cool stuff. We can get into it right now. And I think my playing tends to be that way. Right. And yeah, sometimes at the beginning of a solo, I'm doing some of these things that I'm talking to you about, borrowing from the rhythm section, borrowing from the last soloist, intentionally trying to take an idea that I really dug or that I dig or something maybe that I've been thinking about and trying to explore that in the solo. I do those things because it's like interesting and engaging for me, right? And because I'm focused on another sort of layer adding on top of the vocabulary that I already speak.
Right.
So I'm thinking about that stuff as I'm doing it. So even if your personality is not naturally to like develop and grow per se over a course, you can think of some of these things and it can naturally cause that in your playing.
Right.
It's just about what are you thinking about? Like when you're playing, are you just like, man, I got to hit these changes, thirds and sevenths. I got to make sure. Are you thinking like that? Or well, there's this 2-5-1 now. Okay, let me make sure I play that. Is that what the way you're thinking, or are you thinking more like, what do I want to happen? Like what do I want people to experience? Heck, what do I want to experience? When I'm playing over the course of a solo, like, yeah. So I think some of it you can change by just making yourself think differently
Right.
when you're playing. Like, focus on different kinds of things. Of course, again, this is not a first lesson kind of topic, because in order to really think different and not sort of have to still be micromanaging things, you have to be so comfortable with something that you don't have to think about
Right.
the chords that you're playing with. It's just happening.
Right.
You know. So
So maybe start with something like a blues when you're practicing.
yes,
Yeah.
there you go. There you go.